I knew this feeling well, the familiar, crushing pressure of being a burden, a complication, the old world confusion they so often condescendingly referred to. Henderson had just finished delivering the devastating news, his voice a drone of corporate apathy. "We're missing the original affidavit of support, 1 to 864. Without that specific piece of paper, Mrs. Diaz, the consulate will reject the final application. We've checked everywhere. You'll have to return home. There is no appeal." My vision narrowed, focusing only on the knot of expensive silk that made up Henderson's tie, a futile anchor in my rising panic. I felt the hot, tight squeeze of fate closing around me. I heard the words, but what truly struck me was the silence that followed, quickly filled by my children's voices. "See, Mama." Elena sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "I told you to keep all the papers together. This is your fault. You just don't pay attention. You can't handle the system." Miguel nodded, his expression a mirror of her frustration, a silent, cutting accusation. "Our lawyer is the best, Mama. If he can't find it, you lost it. We've spent so much money, and now, deportation." Their words, smooth and fluent in the language of this country, were like tiny, sharp pebbles hitting the glass of my already fragile composure. They spoke of forms and systems, of expensive solutions, but never of the sacrifice. The long nights cleaning offices and kitchens to send them to college. The years I'd spent navigating a world that didn't want me, just so they could have this easy confidence, this effortless belonging. The shame, the humiliation, was a heavy cloak suffocating me. I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, the tears I had promised myself I would not shed, not in front of them, not again. I was trapped, exposed, a simple woman who had failed at the one thing that mattered, staying with my family. Then, a sudden, sharp memory, a flash of something cold and metallic in my hand, pierced the panic. It was not a physical sensation, but a phantom ache in my fingers, the precise, exacting control of an ancient tool. The devastating finality of Henderson's words, "There is no appeal," began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, ice-cold fury. My eyes drifted from their disappointed faces, past the stacks of forms, to a single, blank, crisp white I-864 affidavit of support form sitting innocently on the corner of the desk. A spare copy Henderson had printed. It was a blank slate, a void of bureaucracy. A crucial legal document was missing, threatening my deportation, and their expensive lawyer was stumped. Everyone in the room looked at that blank page with despair. They saw a roadblock, a piece of paper that proved the end of my life here. They saw a form that only an official hand could validate. The question hung in the stale office air, heavy and unanswered. How could one missing piece of paper destroy everything I had built? And why did my children immediately assume my ineptitude was the cause? My mind went back in time, over 5 decades, to the humid air of my grandfather's study, the scent of expensive ink and old parchment, the rhythmic scratch of his pen. Don Ricardo, the family's forgotten legend, was a master calligrapher for the highest houses. A man whose hand could reproduce or create any script with a precision that bordered on perfection. Though he only used his gift for beauty and preservation, he used to tell me, a little girl with a fierce attention to detail, that the power is not in the ink, Mia, but in the certainty of the hand. He didn't teach me to fill out forms. He taught me to command the pen, to create a line so perfect, so authentic, that it carried its own authority. I spent my life in this new country as Maria Diaz, the cleaning lady, the kitchen worker, the mama who confused the English forms. I let my children see me that way. It was safer. It was easier for them to climb higher if they thought I was simple. But Don Ricardo's training was not simple. He had taught me the art of the official hand, the exact pressure, the lost scripts, the precise way to reproduce an authentic seal using nothing but a fine nib and a steady heart. The memory of his meticulous work, of him carefully studying the official seals and signatures of old governmental documents, the very thing that gives papers like the I-864 their weight rushed back. This visa problem, this missing document, was the last straw. I had lived under their polite contempt for too long. I looked at the official, blank form, then at their panicked faces, and without a word, reached out and picked up Mr. Henderson's favorite Mont Blanc pen. It was heavy, perfectly balanced. This wasn't about filing a form correctly. This was about rewriting the narrative, about showing them that the old world confusion held a secret sharp-edged power they never saw coming. The game was about to change. The silence in my apartment was a physical presence, thick and heavy after the storm of my children's accusations. I could still hear Elena's voice, sharp with a panic that had quickly morphed into accusation. "Mama, how could you be so careless? That was the most important paper." And Miguel, my quiet son, adding his own quiet condemnation with a sigh, "We told you to let us handle it. This is too complicated for you." Their words hadn't just hurt, they had carved out a hollow space inside me, a void where a mother's love had once resided, now filled with the icy chill of betrayal. It wasn't just the deportation threat, it was the way they dismissed my entire life's work with a single, shared assumption of my incompetence. They forgot, or perhaps never truly knew, that the hands they saw scrubbing floors and kneading dough were the same hands that had once held a pen with the disciplined grace of a master. They saw Maria Diaz, the cleaning lady, a persona I had carefully constructed for their benefit, for their safety, so they could climb the ladder of this new world unburdened by the weight of my past. I had let them believe the fiction because it was easier for them. Now, that fiction was a cage. I walked to the small wooden shelf, next to a dried flower from my mother's garden, and my worn Spanish prayer book stood a dusty photograph of Don Ricardo. His eyes, even in the faded sepia, held a fierce, intelligent kindness. I remembered his words, "The power is not in the ink, Mia, but in the certainty of the hand." The shame that had threatened to drown me curdled, transforming in the crucible of memory into something else, a pure, cold resolve. I realized the missing document wasn't just lost by some tragic accident of my own making. That was the story they wanted to believe. The truth was far more sinister. It was a deliberate act, sabotage or colossal negligence, but from whose hand? My mind, so long dormant in matters of strategy and detail, ignited. I went to this small, locked metal box where I kept every important document we owned. I had the key on a chain around my neck, a habit from a life where losing a paper could mean losing everything. I unlocked it. Inside, everything was in its precise, obsessive order. My children's birth certificates, their elementary school report cards, their first Social Security cards, the deed to this apartment, every immigration paper since our arrival, all were accounted for, neatly filed in protective plastic sleeves. The I-864 affidavit of support, signed by Elena's husband, Tom, had been in this box. I had placed it there myself after their lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had given it to me for safekeeping until the final submission. I had taken the entire box to the lawyer's office for the final appointment. I remembered the scene with a new, painful clarity. The polished conference room. Mr. Henderson, brisk and efficient. Tom, distracted, checking his phone. Elena nervous, her hands fluttering, and Miguel, who had insisted on coming for moral support. There was a moment of chaos when Henderson's paralegal brought in coffee, and Tom, jumping up to help, had knocked over a cup, sending a dark stain across the polished table. In the flurry of apologies and napkins, the box had been left open on the table. I had gone to the restroom to clean a spot of coffee from my dress. Anyone in that room could have taken it, but why? Tom, he seemed genuinely invested in the process, his own financial stability tied to its success. Elena, she wanted this more than anyone. Miguel, his quiet disapproval of the entire process, his belief that I was a burden he'd have to bear. A cold dread trickled down my spine. Or Henderson himself. Was there some financial or legal complication he hadn't disclosed? The negligence theory was simpler. Had it simply fallen out, been misplaced in the lawyer's own disarray? But my gut, the same instinct that knew the exact pressure needed to mimic a 19th century notary's flourish, told me this was no accident. This was a message, a declaration that my place in this family, in this country, was contingent on my continued helplessness. They needed me to be the confused mother, the source of the problem, so they could remain the capable solvers. Well, I was done being the problem. Don Ricardo hadn't just taught me to recreate scripts. He taught me how to read the story behind them, the tremor of a lie, the arrogance of a signature, the blank space where a truth should be. It was time to stop being a character in their story and become the author of my own. The first chapter began with finding the missing document, or rather, with creating a new one. But to make it flawless, I needed to study the original. I needed to get back into that lawyer's office. As I stared at the columns of figures on the forms, my thumb unconsciously traced the sharp edge of the desk, and my mind drifted, conjuring a phantom sensation, the cool, heavy weight of my grandfather's agate seal in my palm. It was a solid, grounding presence against the tremor of panic I'd been fighting since Henderson's office. I was no longer in the office, but back in my apartment, polishing the glass display case. My cloth stalled over that one object, Don Ricardo's seal. Its surface, polished, smooth by time and use, felt like a conduit as my thumb traced the intricate, almost impossibly small RV carved into the blood-red stone. I am no longer in my quiet apartment, but in his sun-drenched studio in Madrid, the air thick with the smells of lamp-black ink and old paper. It's not the beautiful, finished pieces I remember first, the commissions for diplomats and collectors that he'd let me watch him create. It's the lessons, the tedious, painstaking, glorious lessons that went far beyond a graceful hand. Anyone can copy a shape, Nina *, he'd say, his voice a dry rustle. The forger copies the shape. The artist understands the pressure. The historian understands the reason for the pressure. He taught me to feel the difference between a signature made with confidence and one made with haste, how the slight tremor of a lie could be betrayed by a microscopic pooling of ink at the end of a stroke. We didn't just study scripts, we dissected paper under a magnifying lamp, identifying the unique weave and texture of linen from different mills, the faint watermarks that were a manufacturer's hidden signature. He called it reading the silence. The blank space on a document could be more telling than the text. Why was there such a large margin? Was it for a seal that was never applied? Was the spacing between lines consistent, or had something been added later, crammed into an existing structure? He had binders filled with samples, official stamps, notarial seals, the bureaucratic detritus of decades, each one a lesson in authenticity. He taught me about ink oxidation, how the iron gall ink used in so many old documents would age, darkening and eating slightly into the paper over time, a process nearly impossible to replicate perfectly in a hurry. This wasn't a hobby, it was a forensic science disguised as an art. A cold, clear certainty washes over me. This useless old hobby, this relic of a life I thought I'd left behind, is the only thing that isn't useless now. It's the exact, niche, and beautifully untraceable skill I need. They, whoever they are, took the document thinking it would render me powerless, a confused widow reliant on their guidance. They saw the coffee stain on my dress, not the decades of disciplined observation in my head. My plan to create a new document is still there, a desperate, thrilling pulse in the back of my mind, but it's premature. A forgery, no matter how perfect, is built on a foundation of knowledge. To recreate the missing paper, I need to know the original, its weight, its texture, the specific shade of blue in the notarial stamp, the font of the typed text, the exact wording of the standard clauses Henderson uses. I need to study the story of that document before I can write a new one, and for that, I need to get back into that lawyer's office. The thought is a jolt of pure, undiluted adrenaline. It's no longer about reacting, it's about acting. I look at the agate seal not as a treasure, but as a tool. My first instinct is to take it, to slip it into my pocket as a talisman. But that's the old impulse, the magpie tendency to cling to beautiful things. No, a forger leaves no traces. A ghost leaves no fingerprints. I place the seal back in its case. I don't need to carry the object. I carry the knowledge it represents. My mind is already racing, constructing a pretext, a follow-up question about the affidavit Tom had mentioned, a supposed document I'd found among my late husband's things that might be relevant. It needs to be plausible, something that requires a few minutes alone in the conference room, or, if I'm impossibly lucky, Henderson's private office. I need to see the environment, understand the rhythm of the place. When does his secretary take her lunch? Is the office locked after hours? I finish cleaning the display case, my movements now deliberate and calm. The panic has been refined into a sharp, focused purpose. I am no longer the problem to be solved. I am the solution, however unorthodox. Don Ricardo hadn't just taught me how to replicate the past. He'd taught me how to manipulate its artifacts, to write my own history into the blank spaces. The missing document is no longer a crisis. It's my first clue, and the first chapter of my new story begins with breaking into a lawyer's office, not to steal anything, but to learn everything. I put away the cleaning supplies. I had a reconnaissance mission to plan. The sadness is gone, replaced by a clear, cold steel determination. I decide I will not just replace the missing document. I will use the process to expose the negligence or malice that caused this. I am going to apply the principles of professional calligraphy and forensic document examination to the forms my children and Mr. Henderson gave me to sign. I pull out my old, hidden calligraphy, set a small wooden box filled with various nibs, powders, and fine brushes and begin my work not as a simple mother, but as a silent, invisible investigator. I will stop being their simple mama and start being my grandfather's granddaughter. The box, smelling of old wood and dried ink, felt like an extension of my own skeleton. Don Ricardo's voice was a whisper in the rustle of the aged paper, protecting the tools. Asterisk, the paper is the first witness. Alina, it will tell you everything if you know how to listen. Asterisk, I laid the forms from Henderson's office on my kitchen table. The stark white sheets looking alien and accusatory against the warm, worn wood. Under the bright pendant light, I began my autopsy. First, the paper. I closed my eyes and ran my fingertips over the surface. It was smooth, cheap, modern laser print paper. No watermark, no texture that spoke of quality or permanence. It was disposable. I compared it to a sheet of the heavy cotton rag paper I used for my own calligraphy, feeling the profound difference between a document meant to last a century and one meant to survive a printer tray. This told me nothing of malice, only of cheapness. But cheapness can be a tool of obfuscation. Next, the ink. I selected a magnifying loupe from the box, the cool metal of its rim, a familiar pressure against my brow. Leaning in, the printed text bloomed into a landscape of tiny dots. Toner, not ink, a laser printer. The letters were composed of a fine, speckled powder fused to the paper. This was useful. It meant the document was generated in an office, probably Henderson's, and not some mysterious, pre-existing form. The uniformity was perfect, sterile. There were no signs of a worn-out printer head, no telltale streaks that would individualize the machine. It was anonymous, which was, in itself, a clue. It was designed to be untraceable, but the signatures were the real evidence. My own, scrawled hastily days ago under pressure, looked pathetic under the loupe. The ballpoint ink was thin, sitting on top of the paper fibers, already slightly feathered. Then, I looked at the lines where my children had signed, Tom's confident slash, Sarah's more careful script, the same ballpoint, the same superficial adherence, but my focus wasn't on the act of signing, but on the space around it. And there, in the blank area above Tom's name, I saw it, or rather, I felt it. I rummaged in the box for a small jar of graphite powder and a fine-haired brush, my hands moving with a muscle memory I hadn't used in 20 years. I dipped the brush and lightly dusted the empty space on the form. The graphite clung to the microscopic abrasions, the invisible indentations left by a pen pressed with intent. Like a ghost emerging from a fog, a faint impression began to appear. It was the shape of letters, words that had been written on a page that had once lain on top of this one. I held my breath, dusting with an even lighter hand. It wasn't complete, but it was enough. The ghost words were a name, asterisk Charles, asterisk, and then what looked like asterisk Whitman, asterisk, and below it, a string of digits, a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone named Charles Whitman had written his name and number on a piece of paper that had been on top of this form, in Henderson's office, before my children ever signed it. Who was he? A colleague? A client? Another piece in a puzzle I was only beginning to see. This changed everything. This wasn't just about a missing document anymore. It was about a connection. Henderson wasn't operating in a vacuum. The reconnaissance mission was no longer just about learning the office layout or the secretary's lunch hour. It was about finding a connection to Charles Whitman. A notepad, a Rolodex, an appointment book, anywhere that name might be recorded. I carefully blew the graphite away, leaving no trace of my examination. The ghost words faded back into nothingness, but they were now etched into my mind. The cold steel determination warmed into a hunter's focus. My calligraphy set was no longer just a box of artistic tools. It was a forensic kit. Don Ricardo hadn't just taught me to create beauty. He'd taught me to see the truth hidden in plain sight. The plan was solidifying. I wouldn't just break in to observe. I would break in to find Charles Whitman. And with that name as my key, I would begin to unlock the door Henderson had tried to slam shut on my future. The forger was becoming the detective. The stack of forms Alina and Miguel handed over felt like a guilty secret, a pile of paper scenes they were oblivious to having committed. They'd scoffed, of course, when I'd asked, "Ay, mamá, siempre complicando las cosas," Elena had sighed. But she'd rifled through a kitchen drawer and produced a wrinkled manila folder. Miguel, ever the condescending prince, had simply arched an eyebrow and said, "Just don't spill any asterisk cafe cito asterisks on them." Their official copies, if only he knew, their dismissiveness was my greatest asset. To them, I was just there, worrying, slightly eccentric mother, clinging to the paperwork of a failed endeavor. They saw a dead end. I saw a crime scene. Under the weak, focused halo of my architect's lamp, the night became my laboratory. The jeweler's loop, a tool I'd once used to appreciate the filigree on a vintage pen nib, was now a forensic instrument. I spread the forms across my desk, a mosaic of bureaucratic failure. The air smelled of old paper and my own sharp concentration. I started with the easy ones, the G28s and the I-130s, familiarizing myself with the true topography of the ink, the pressure points of my children's genuine signatures. Elena's was a rushed, looping scrawl, full of forward momentum. Miguel's was sharper, more controlled, a mark of someone who believed his own signature carried weight. Then I turned to the affidavit of support, the I-864, the cornerstone of the entire application, the document that proved my son-in-law David could financially support me. The paper felt different, slightly cooler, maybe just my imagination, or maybe the chill of forgery. I centered the loop over David's signature on the carbon copy page. At first glance, it was perfect, a confident, almost flamboyant replication of the signature I'd seen on other documents. But Don Ricardo's voice was in my ear. "A ghost from my youth in Buenos Aires. La verdad no está en la línea querida, sino en el viaje. Truth isn't in the line, but in the journey." I ignored the shape of the letters and followed the path of the pen, and there it was. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor on the upstroke of the D. A hesitation that spoke not of a man signing his name, but of a hand trying to remember a shape. The pressure was inconsistent. The genuine signatures from David on the other forms showed a uniform, heavy pressure, a man pressing his claim into the paper. This signature started strong but faded on the tail end of the last D, as if the forger's concentration or his nerve had wavered. But this wasn't the work of a professional. A professional, even a cheap one, would have traced it, resulting in a dead, embalmed line. This was something else. This was someone who had practiced, someone familiar with the signature, but who was working under duress or in haste. My heart began a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. This wasn't Henderson's work. His kind of crime was cold, administrative, losing a file, misplacing a form. This was intimate. This was betrayal. I shifted the loop to the sponsor's signature line. Miguel's name stared back at me. As the petitioner, he had to sign this form too, swearing to the truth of its contents. I examined the line, the flow, and then I saw it. The anomaly was so subtle I almost dismissed it as a flaw in the carbon paper. But it wasn't. The ink of Miguel's signature on this line, the crucial one, had a different density. It was slightly lighter, slightly more granular than his signature on the other forms. It was as if it had been written with a different pen, or at a different time. My breath caught in my throat. The theory formed, cold and ugly. What if Miguel had signed a blank or incomplete form? What if he'd handed over a stack of papers, some signed, some not, to Henderson, trusting the lawyer to complete the work? Then Henderson, or someone else, could have added the forged sponsor's signature later, after Miguel's genuine signature was already in place. It was a common trick, one Don Ricardo had warned me about. "Nunca firmes una página en blanco," he'd said. His face grab it. Never sign a blank page. It gives someone else the power to write your story. Miguel, my brilliant, arrogant son, the one who was always in a hurry, who believed the rules were for lesser minds. He was so proud of handling the complicated legal stuff. Had his haste, his condescension towards the process, created the very loophole that destroyed it. He wouldn't have seen it as fraud. He would have seen it as efficiency, trusting the expert he'd paid. But that trust had been a weapon turned against us. The ghost of Charles Whitman seemed to whisper from the other document, the one hidden away. This was the connection. Henderson had needed a fall guy, a reason for the application to fail without it being traced back to his negligence or his deliberate sabotage. A forged signature on the most important form was a perfect, undeniable poison pill. And Miguel, by signing incompletely, had handed him the syringe. I leaned back, the loop falling from my eye. The quiet of the night was deafening. The hunter's focus I'd felt earlier was now laced with a sickening grief. The puzzle was coming together, but the picture it revealed was of my own son's carelessness paving the road to my exile. This wasn't just about breaking into an office anymore. It was about breaking a truth to my son that would shatter the image he had of himself, and I would have to do it with the cold, hard evidence I could now see so clearly. The detective had found her first suspect, and he was sleeping down the hall. The scent of old paper and ink from the shop clung to my clothes like a confession as I slipped back inside the apartment. The silence was a physical weight, and the flat, archival paper I'd purchased from Signora Sofia felt like a lead weight in my bag. It wasn't just paper. It was a key, and the lock it was meant to open was my son's pride. I went to the small desk in my room, the one Miguel had set up for me with a new laptop I never used. I cleared a space, a ritualistic sweeping away of the present. Then, I laid out the evidence. On the left, the crisp, new sheet from Sofia's shop. In the middle, the loop. On the right, the damning sponsorship form, its fatal blank space seeming to pulse under the lamplight. My hands trembled as I began the forgery. Not of a signature, but of a moment in time. I needed to see it, to feel the mechanics of the betrayal. I selected a modern pen, one of Miguel's, the kind that writes with a smooth, cheap consistency. I pressed it to the pristine archival paper. The line it laid down was flat, lifeless, a monotonous river of black. It was serviceable. It was efficient. It was the ink of a man in a hurry, a man who saw a document as a hurdle, not a testament. Then, from my own precious case, I took out my grandfather's pen. The weight of it was an immediate comfort, a grounding force. I dipped the nib into a small bottle of the iron gall ink Sofia had sold me, along with the paper, the same formulation my grandfather would have used. The difference was not subtle. It was a chasm. As I drew a line on another piece of the archival paper, the ink went down a pale, watery gray, but as the seconds passed, it began to change, darkening through a chemical reaction with the air, settling into a deep, rich, blue-black that seemed to have dimension, a soul. It was the ink of consideration, of permanence, the ink of a master calligrapher. I held the loop over the sponsorship form again, over Don Ricardo's forged signature. Under magnification, the deception screamed. The line was uniform, a perfect, dead black. There was no variation in pressure, no slight tremor of a human hand creating subtle, thick and thin areas. It was the work of a machine, or a hand so practiced in fraud it had become one. It was the cheap ink, the same cheap ink Miguel had inquired about at Sofia's papelaria letters. The details Sofia had given me wasn't just a clue. It was the entire narrative. Miguel, rushing, trusting the expert Henderson, would have signed where he was told. He would have used whatever pen was on Henderson's desk, not thinking about archival quality, about the story the ink itself would tell. He was securing a future, not preserving a legacy. In his arrogance, he'd never considered that the tool itself could become the weapon. Henderson, the Viper, must have had the cheap pen ready. He'd taken the partially signed form, waited, and then later, added the sponsor's signature with a different, finer pen perhaps, even one that mimicked a more traditional ink to create a visual discrepancy that would be caught by a discerning eye, but only if someone was looking for it. The forgery wasn't just in the signature. It was in the entire material history of the document. He had created a perfect, self-incriminating artifact. My son's haste had provided the canvas. Henderson had painted the crime scene onto it. A cold fury began to burn through the grief. This was no longer about a mistake. It was a premeditated assassination of our dream, using Miguel's own character flaws as the murder weapon. Henderson hadn't just exploited a loophole. He had engineered one, counting on Miguel's impatient pride and my eventual powerlessness. I had to tell him. The thought was a stone in my gut, but I couldn't just present him with the accusation. He would retreat, become defensive, hide behind a wall of legal jargon and wounded ego. I needed him to see it, to truly see the difference between craft and carelessness, between a legacy built to last and a transaction built to fail. An idea, fragile and dangerous, began to form. It was a gamble, a performance that could shatter what was left of our relationship. But the detective in me knew it was the only way. The next morning, I waited until Isabella had left for work. I found Miguel in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked young, my brilliant boy, still untouchable in the fortress of his own intellect. Miguel, I said, my voice softer than I felt, I need your help with something, a project. You can be my legal witness. I almost choked on the words, but they had the desired effect. A flicker of interest, mixed with a hint of that old condescension. A project for his nostalgic mother. Okay, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. A bit offbeat, but okay. What do you need me to do? On the other, the same word with my grandfather's pen and iron gall ink. I need you to tell me which line has more life. Which one feels permanent. Sign your name on this practice sheet. Let me see the ink you choose. Now, let me show you what happens when the wrong ink is chosen for a document that is meant to last forever. Maybe we can work from this. No. He grabs it immediately, visibly relieved that I found a solution, which confirms his desperation. He doesn't notice the flaw, but I notice his hurried call to a contact, mentioning he has a new copy to work with, suggesting he knows how to manipulate the process, but not how to spot a master's trap. I watch him, this man who shares my blood and my father's name, and feel a cold clarity settle over me. He is so transparent in his greed. The phone call is a performance, a low-voiced, hurried conversation in the next room, meant to be overheard. Yes, a new copy. It's clean. We can proceed. He thinks he's orchestrating a symphony, but he's just a single, predictable note. Now, I say, reclaiming his attention as he re-enters the kitchen, the photocopy held delicately in his hand like a winning lottery ticket. The ink. We must choose the ink with care. A document like this, an affidavit, it must have weight, it must feel real. I gesture to the two pens lying on the table, the modern plastic one and my grandfather's worn, wooden-handled pen. You saw the difference. The permanence. I slide the modern pen back toward him. You will be the witness. You will sign and date it, just as you did on the practice sheet. We need to see how the two inks interact on the page over time. It's a chemical test, as much as an artistic one. This is just a rehearsal, a meaningless exercise. To me, it is the entire case being built, line by a deliberate line. I dip the nib into the small bottle of iron gall ink. The scent is sharp, metallic, a ghost of oak galls and iron salts. I begin to write on the archival paper, not the photocopy. I choose a quote my father did indeed love, from a poet he admired. Asterisk, the roots of the tree seek water, but the leaves seek light. Asterisk, the words flow from the nib, a deep, rich gray-blue that I know will oxidize to a permanent, unforgiving black. Each stroke is a prayer, a connection to the past I am defending. Your turn, I say, my voice soft. I push the archival paper toward him. Sign here, at the bottom, as a witness to our little collaboration. Now, the final test, I whisper, the tension in the room tightening like a drumskin. I pick up the photocopy of the affidavit. We need to see how a signature transfers, how it looks on different paper stocks. For the archives, you understand, this is the most dangerous part. I am asking him to sign the very type of document he plans to forge, but wrapped in the guise of artistic process, it becomes plausible. Just a quick signature. On this copy, he asks, a flicker of caution in his eyes. Yes, right here, in the witness box. I want to compare the line quality, the pressure. I keep my tone light, academic. It's all about the authenticity of the mark. My evidence is now triplicate, the practice sheet, our collaborative art piece, and now, the placeholder for the crime itself. Good, I say, taking the photocopy back as if it were a precious manuscript. I make a show of holding it to the light, studying the signature. Yes, you can see the difference immediately. The carbon-based ink lacks soul. It has no history. As long as it gets the job done, he has no idea. He has just provided me with a controlled sample of his handwriting, executed with the exact same pen he used for the forgery, and signed the very type of document in question. He has handed me the keys to his own undoing, believing all the while that he was simply indulging an old woman. I watch him for a moment longer, this stranger in my son's skin. The grief is still there, a raw, open wound, but it is now encased in a shell of pure, focused purpose. The trap is no longer just set, it has been sprung, and he, in his arrogant desperation, has walked right into it, leaving his fingerprints on every single bar. He stretched, the picture of a man unburdened, the tension that had coiled his shoulders for weeks, seeming to evaporate into the quiet hum of the kitchen. The performance was over. The old woman had been placated, her eccentricities safely channeled into a folder of meaningless paper. He had no idea that the folder was a coffin, and he had just hammered the final nail in himself. "You know, Mom," he began, his voice taking on a conversational tone that was more insulting than his previous frustration. He leaned against the counter, a king surveying his newly pacified domain. "You really caused a lot of trouble with that first affidavit. I only wanted it to be right." This was it, the casual, arrogant confession. He assumed the corrections, the mess, were mine. He had no way of knowing that the original document had been pristine when I'd given it to him, that any mess on it was of his own making. His negligence, his error, something he couldn't risk his business partner, the meticulous Mr. Henderson, discovering. So he'd destroyed it. The original, the key piece of evidence that would have shown his initial, bungled attempt. My heart hammered against the cage of my ribs, a frantic bird of prey, but my hands were steady as I turned to face him. "You threw it away." I let a tremor of confusion, of old lady worry, seep into my voice. But it was important. He'd handed me a weapon and immediately forgotten it. In fact, let's get it done now. No point dragging this out. Someone who would ask few questions, who would be more interested in the fee than the legality of the proceedings. This was his new plan, brute force and speed, to replace the document he'd destroyed with one he could control completely. Within 45 minutes, a young woman with tired eyes and a cheap suit stood in my living room, clutching a briefcase. Miguel greeted her with a dismissive wave. "She just needs to sign. The rest is my responsibility." Gable, according to her plastic ID tag, looked uneasy. "Sir, I need to witness the signing, and the document should be completed." I let my hands shake a little as I took the pen. Ms. Gable offered. I squinted at the blank form. It was the photocopy I had given him, the one with the slightly misaligned text and the faint ghost image of a printer test page on the back, the flawed copy I had decried as soulless. He was so arrogant, so sure of his control, that he hadn't even bothered to get a fresh, clean form. He was using my prop. "Just sign on the line." "Ma'am, Ms. Gable said softly, her professional demeanor tinged with pity. I did. I signed my name slowly, carefully, a perfect match to the signature on file. The signature of the confused old woman he was presenting me to be. Ms. Gable stamped the document, recorded the details in her logbook, and scurried out as quickly as she'd arrived, clearly wanting no further part in whatever this was. The moment the door clicked shut, Miguel snatched the document from the table. "See, easy," he said, folding it and tucking it into his inner jacket pocket. "I'll take care of the rest. You don't have to worry about a thing." And if anyone questioned it, if the legality was challenged, he would point to the confused old woman who signed a blank form. The liability would be entirely mine. The crime would be mine. He patted his pocket, a gesture of supreme satisfaction. "It's all taken care of, Mom." But in my drawer, nestled in its acid-free tomb, was the triptych of his downfall, the practice sheet showing his hand, the collaborative quote proving the pen, and the unsigned photocopy that was a perfect match to the now notarized blank form in his pocket. He had confessed to destroying the original, and he had just commissioned a new, fraudulent one. The trap was no longer just sprung. He was already in the bottom of it, digging himself deeper with every arrogant, condescending word, and I, the frail, confused old mother, was quietly gathering the dirt to bury him. He believed the performance was over, the curtain drawn on my senility, but for me, the real show was just beginning. "You're such a good boy to handle these tedious things for me," I'd said, and the words, so syrupy and false, had been the sweetest poison. He'd swallowed them whole. Now, as he preened and patted the grenade in his breast pocket, I felt a calm settle over me, a clarity I hadn't known since before Arthur's passing. This was no longer about defense. It was a meticulously planned offensive. Miguel leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be comforting but felt like a serpent's hiss. "I'll get this filed with Henderson first thing tomorrow. Then we can finally put all this business behind us. You can just rest." The silence that rushed in was thick and heavy, but it was my silence now. I waited, counting the slow ticks of the grandfather clock in the hall. 1 minute, 2. I needed to be sure he was truly gone, not lingering in the driveway to make a triumphant call to his co-conspirator. When I was certain, I moved. The frail old woman evaporated. My hands, which had trembled so convincingly for Gable, were steady as a surgeon's as I pulled open the desk drawer. My fingers bypassed the triptych of his downfall, the practice sheet, the quote, the photocopy, and went to the very back, to a small, felt-wrapped bundle. Unfolding it, I revealed my instruments, my Mont Blanc Meisterstuck, and a small, unlabeled vial of clear liquid with a needle-fine applicator tip. Don Ricardo's final, most valuable lessons. The pen felt like an extension of my own bone and sinew. Don Ricardo hadn't just taught me to sign my name. He had taught me the art of the hand, the personality in a curve, the history in a line. He'd said a signature was a man's ghost, left behind on paper long after he was gone. Arthur's ghost was in every ledger of this company, and I would not let Miguel and Henderson exercise it with a cheap forgery. I took out a fresh sheet of paper. This was the true final act, the one Miguel hadn't even known was playing. I agreed to sign the flawed copy, yes, but I had insisted on using my own pen. It was a small, sentimental request he'd readily dismissed as another of my quirks. He never saw the real reason. The ink in my Mont Blanc was a special formulation, one Don Ricardo had sourced from a paranoid, brilliant chemist in Germany decades ago. It was more than permanent. It was possessive, bonding with the paper fibers in a unique way. As Gable had looked on, her discomfort a palpable cloud in the room, I had not merely signed, I had performed. I let my hand shake initially, then steady with apparent concentration. The signature that flowed from the NIB was a masterpiece of deception. To any eye, even a trained one, it was Eleanor's flawless, official signature, the one from the corporate documents Miguel had so carelessly destroyed. But it contained a single, deliberate flaw, a microscopic deviation known only to me. On the capital E, the final, looping flourish curved inward instead of outward, a secret I had never committed to any government or bank document. It was a trapdoor built into the very foundation of his fraud. But that was only the first layer. While Gable was busy stamping the document and recording the transaction in her logbook, my left hand, hidden beneath the desk, had been busy. Using the tiny vial and its applicator, I had touched a minuscule drop of the clear liquid to the paper's edge, near where the notary seal would be pressed. The liquid, a compound my grandfather had used to mark his original blueprints, was utterly invisible. It would only react, glowing a specific, faint cerulean blue, under a very specific wavelength of UV light, a wavelength found only in a specialized lamp Arthur had kept in his private safe. A lamp I now held the key to. This invisible mark was my second safeguard. If Miguel was clever enough to try and lift my signature and place it on another document, the absence of this mark would betray him. It tied the signature irrevocably to that specific piece of paper, at that specific moment, under the notary's seal. I leaned back, the tools of my victory laid out before me. He had the document, yes, a notarized, signed affidavit, but it was a Trojan horse. He saw a blank check. I saw a signed confession waiting to be written. He would go to Henderson tomorrow, and they would fill in their terms, their lies, their theft. They would think themselves invincible. But when they presented it, when they tried to use my own name against me, I would be ready. I would produce the triptych from my drawer. I would point to the flawless yet flawed signature, and reveal its hidden defect, and then, under the cool, revealing light of Arthur's UV lamp, I would show the world the invisible mark that proved the document was a fixed point in time, a snapshot of his crime. He had confessed to destroying the original. He had commissioned a new one, and he had just had me notarize a fraudulent replacement. The trap was no longer just sprung. He was already in the bottom of it, digging himself deeper with every arrogant, condescending word, and I, the frail, confused old mother, was quietly gathering the dirt to bury him. Tomorrow, the confrontation would come. Tomorrow, I would face Henderson and my children. But tonight, I sat in the quiet gloom, the ghost of my husband in the empty chair across from me, and I practiced the look of shattered betrayal I would show them all. It was, I feared, the easiest performance I would have to give. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice a carefully modulated tremor. We need to meet, one last time. It's regarding the I-864. I have an urgent correction to make about the document Miguel found. I was under the impression the matter was settled. The hours until the meeting stretched and contracted, a strange elastic time where I was both fully present and watching myself from a great distance. I selected my clothes with the care of a general, preparing his uniform for a parade. A simple, modest navy blue dress, pearls that Arthur had given me on our 30th anniversary, low-heeled shoes. I needed to look every inch the respectable, slightly overwhelmed widow. The performance had to be flawless, Miguel called, his voice dripping with condescending approval. Mother, Henderson told me, I'm glad you've come to your senses. It's for the best. I made a non-committal sound, a murmur of acquiescence that he took for defeat. Let him believe it. Let them all believe it. The walk from the car to the stark glass doors of Henderson's building was a march to the gallows, but I was the one holding the rope. I carried my purse, and inside it, the completed, notarized affidavit of support, my Trojan horse. It felt like it was radiating a malevolent heat through the leather. The same conference room, the same oppressive silence, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. The same large, polished table reflecting our distorted images back at us. I took the same seat I had occupied during my humiliation, placing my purse carefully on the floor beside me. They filed in, Henderson first, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but I saw the weariness in the slump of his shoulders. He wanted this messy, familial drama concluded. Then, Alina, her posture rigid, her mouth a thin, irritated line. She couldn't even look at me, her relief tainted by the annoyance of having to be here at all. Finally, Miguel entered with the victor's stride, a faint, smug smile playing on his lips. He came over and patted my shoulder, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but that felt like a claim of ownership. Mother, he said, his voice too loud for the room. You did the right thing. I could feel their expectations, Miguel's triumph, Elena's impatience, Henderson's desire for closure pressing in on me. This was the moment. The quiet gloom of my study was gone, replaced by the sterile, revealing light of this room. Yes, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the cool, hard rectangle of the UV flashlight Arthur had used for checking the authenticity of old banknotes. I ignored it and withdrew the single sheet of paper. I laid it on the table, the crisp typeface, and the flamboyant, notarized signature facing them. This is the new affidavit of support, fully executed, as you can see. With my signature, you see, Miguel, when you presented the document you found, you confessed to a crime, and now, you have brought me here to present this replacement. He taught me many things, including the importance of safeguards. I opened my purse again, and this time, I withdrew the two other items, the original, voided affidavit with its dramatic black lines, and the practice sheet with my 20 perfect signatures. I placed them on the table, forming a triptych of evidence. Miguel scoffed, but it was a hollow sound. This is nonsense. Senility. Those are just scraps of paper. This signature looks perfect, doesn't it? A flawless replica of the one on the original. I then pointed to the practice sheet. But it is a replica. I practiced until I could copy my own signature exactly, to create the illusion of consistency. Delaney, a mark that ties the signature irrevocably to that specific piece of paper, at that specific moment, under the notary's seal. Then, slowly, I moved the light to the original, voided affidavit. I illuminated my signature there. And there, just below the final loop of the Y in Delaney, a tiny, intricate symbol glowed with a bright, chemical luminescence. A small, perfect star that Arthur had always used as his personal mark. Miguel's face drained of all color. He understood. He understood completely. This document, I said, my voice rising for the first time, clear and sharp as broken glass, the one you pressured me to sign, the one you believed was your blank check. It has no mark. It was signed at my kitchen table, under duress, not in the presence of a notary for the purpose of supporting Alina. It is a fraudulent replacement. You destroyed the original, commissioned a new one, and tricked me into signing it under false pretenses. You didn't just find a document, Miguel. You created a confession. And you just had it notarized. You found the original document. Miguel quickly interrupted. No, it's the new one, the one I fixed. Mama found a clean copy. I leaned in, my voice quiet, and simply said, it is a new one, Miguel, and it is perfect. But the question is, whose carelessness caused the original to be lost? He's trying to steer the narrative, to paint me as the forgetful old woman once more. It was a simple mistake, a spill. These things happen. The important thing is that it's rectified now. You've attested to my identity and my willingness to sign, correct? But I am I reach into my purse, my fingers brushing past a worn leather wallet and a tube of lipstick before closing around the cool, cylindrical metal of the UV flashlight. The weight of it is a comfort, a touchstone. This is for you, Arthur. Miguel's eyes lock onto my hand as I withdraw it. What are you doing? He asks, his voice tight. Alina, who has been a silent, trembling statue, whispers, Mama, please, just the truth. I finally took out the UV flashlight. My hand was steady. I clicked it on. The purple beam cut through the room's bland lighting. What is that? Alina whispered, her voice trembling. The truth, I said softly. My light lingered on the pristine signature of the notary on the new affidavit, but it was the original document I needed. With a steady hand, I directed the beam onto my own name, signed and voided days ago. And there it was, just as before, beneath the final loop of the Y in Delaney. Arthur's tiny, perfect star glowed with a silent, chemical truth. Miguel's face drained of all color. He understood completely. This document, I said, my voice rising for the first time, clear and sharp as broken glass. The one you pressured me to sign, the one you believed was your blank check. It has no mark. It was signed at my kitchen table, under duress, not in the presence of a notary, for the purpose of supporting Alina. It is a fraudulent replacement. You destroyed the original, commissioned a new one, and tricked me into signing it under false pretenses. You didn't just find a document, Miguel, you created a confession. And you just had it notarized. Henderson slowly picked up the new affidavit, holding it under the violet beam. He stared at the unadorned signature, then back at the original, at the tiny, glowing star, Arthur's star. His professional composure cracked, revealing a layer of pure, unadulterated shock. Miguel looked like a man who had been physically struck. He staggered back a step, his hand gripping the back of a chair for support. You set a trap for me. Your own son, developed by your father, easily verified by any forensic document lab. I turned to Henderson. Mr. Henderson, you have now witnessed a crime. You notarized a document that you now have reason to believe was created with the intent to defraud. Your seal is on a confession, and my own legal counsel. You're a senile old woman playing with flashlights. You can't do this to me. You tried to steal from your family. You thought my mind was gone, but it was your conscience that was missing. Now, I said, turning to Henderson, my posture straight, my voice firm with an authority I hadn't felt in years, I believe you have a phone call to make. And after that, Alina and I will be needing our own lawyer. This document, I pointed to the fraudulent one on his desk, is void. The original trust, with all its intended provisions for Alina, stands. My signature, with my husband's mark, confirms it. The air in the room, already thick with tension, seemed to solidify. This is odd, he murmured, more to himself than to any of us. He tapped a finger on the notary's signature. This signature, the notary's, it looks slightly different from the ones I have on file from their other submissions. The J in Johnson is looped differently. Of course it's different, he snapped, his voice a brittle shield against the rising tide of evidence. I told you, I used a cheap, quick notary service downtown. Probably some kid working his first week. Inconsistency is what you get when you don't pay for quality. He attempted a laugh, but it came out as a strangled cough. This proves nothing, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, were fixed on me. He knew the dance was not over. This was my opening. The calm I felt was not the stillness of peace, but the focused quiet of a predator before the strike. A question, indeed, I said, my voice soft yet cutting through Miguel's bluster. I reached into the inner pocket of my cardigan and retrieved my jeweler's loop. The cool, familiar weight of the brass cylinder a comfort in my palm. Mr. Henderson, if I may. I slid the loop across the polished surface of his desk. It came to a stop precisely before him. Would you be so kind as to look at my signature on the I-864 form I just presented to you, the one I signed in your presence? Does it look official to you? Clear, deliberate. Then, he lowered the loop and looked at me, a new, grudging respect in his gaze. There's a microscopic flourish on the new signature, a deliberate little curl on the tail of the Y that is entirely absent from the older one. It is a performance. A forgery of my own hand, created to be just a little too good. The notary seal on your document is real, Mr. Henderson. I have no doubt the stamp was applied by a legitimate, if careless, notary. but the paper underneath now carries my own unique, unauthorized stamp. Then, as if emerging from a deep sea, the tiny five-pointed star began to glow with an ethereal, blue-white luminescence. It was nestled perfectly within the curves of the notary's official stamp, a secret constellation hidden in plain sight. Alina gasped. Papa's star. I created it as a test, to see who was truly responsible for this betrayal. The document you hold is the one Miguel found, a copy that already had a fatal flaw. A microdot of wax I placed near the margin that would catch the light, just so. I shifted the UV beam slightly, illuminating the almost imperceptible bump on the paper. Miguel went a terrifying shade of white, the color draining from his face so completely I thought he might faint. He looked like a man watching his own ghost rise before him. You, he choked out, but no other words would come. The revelation was complete. The room returned to its mundane reality as I clicked off the light, but the ghost of the star remained burned onto our retinas. Everything was irrevocably changed. It's done, Miguel, I said, my voice flat, all emotion spent. I felt a profound sorrow wash over me, colder and more desolate than any anger. I looked at my son, and I saw not the avaricious stranger, but the boy he had been, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee running through this very house, the young man so proud and hopeful at his college graduation. That boy was gone, lost to a greed I could not comprehend. The loss felt heavier than any betrayal. I turned to Henderson, my posture straight, my voice firm with an authority I hadn't felt in years, an authority I had ceded to grief and time. Now, I said, cutting through the thick silence, I believe you have a phone call to make, and after that, Alina and I will be needing our own lawyer. This document, I pointed a steady finger at the fraudulent one on his desk. The paper, now seeming cheap and tawdry, is void. The original trust, with all its intended provisions for Alina, stands. My signature, authenticated by my husband's mark, confirms it. He simply nodded, a sharp, professional dip of his chin, and reached for his phone. The spell was broken. The battle was over. But as I looked from my shattered son to my weeping daughter, I knew the war for this family's soul had only just begun, and the battlefield was the wreckage left in this quiet, comfortable room. The checkmate is complete. The air in the room, thick with the ghosts of my husband's starlight, now crackled with a different, more terrestrial energy. Miguel's face was a pale, crumpled map of his own ruin. Henderson had become a statue of professional composure, but his eyes, sharp and reassessing, darted from me to the damning piece of paper I had just laid upon his desk. I produced it slowly, with a deliberateness that felt both theatrical and sacred. It was the small, torn piece of the original affidavit of support, its edges softened from being clutched in my palm. I had fished it from the bottom of Miguel's kitchen trash bin weeks ago, a seemingly insignificant scrap hiding beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. Now, I placed it on the polished wood, a final, undeniable piece of the puzzle. Miguel told me he threw out the first affidavit because it had too many corrections, I said, my voice unnervingly calm, a flat plane after the storm of revelation. He did not lose it. He destroyed it to cover his own error, probably an incorrect income figure or a legal violation, and then tried to trick me into signing a blank form so he could complete the new one improperly and blame me if it failed. Her gaze shifted from the scrap of paper to her brother, and the look was not one of anger, but of profound, heartbreaking disillusionment. The realization that their simple mother had used forensic label patience and deception to expose the lie completely shattered their patronizing view of me. I was no longer the confused widow to be managed. I was the architect of this exposure. Henderson, ever the pragmatist, saw the logic fall into place with the neat click of a lock. The torn affidavit fragment, coupled with the perfect, unchallengeable replacement document my husband had signed, created an incontrovertible narrative. He knew he must take me seriously now, not as a grieving client, but as a formidable opponent. He cleared his throat, a dry, administrative sound. This alters the situation considerably, he stated, his fingers steepled. The original trust, with its provisions for Alina, is indeed the valid document. My firm will, of course, cease all actions regarding the fraudulent transfer, and will cooperate fully to reinstate the proper terms. The ghost of the star was gone from the air, but it had burned away all his defenses, leaving only the raw, ashamed man beneath. Miguel, I said, my tone softer now, layered with the profound sorrow that had been my constant companion since Robert's death, now deepened by this fresh wound. He flinched but did not turn. "How long?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "How long have you known?" But I knew for certain when I found that. I gestured to the scrap on the desk. I had to be sure. I had to have proof. I was hoping, until the very last second, that you would choose a different path, the one who had to measure up. And when he was gone, it was all on me. The business, the debts you don't even know about. I saw it all slipping away. This, he waved a hand vaguely at the room, at the trust, was a way to secure it, to control it. I thought I was saving us. The arrogance of it was staggering, but the fear behind it was achingly familiar. It was the fear of a boy trying to fill his father's shoes. "You weren't saving us, Miguel," I said, walking toward him. I stopped a few feet away, the space between us feeling like a chasm. "You were destroying us. You betrayed your sister. You betrayed your father's memory. And you betrayed me, but you are still my son, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee running through this house. That boy is in there somewhere. And because of that, this is not the end. This is the beginning of your redemption, if you have the courage to face it." She leaned into me, her strength gone, trusting me to lead. As I reached for the doorknob, I glanced back one last time. Henderson was already on the phone, his voice a low, efficient murmur. And Miguel remained by the window, staring out at a world that had suddenly become much smaller and much darker. A man imprisoned, not by walls, but by the consequences of his own choices. The battle for the trust was won. The war for my son's soul, I knew, had only just begun on the battlefield of this quiet, comfortable room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, sealing Miguel in with the ghost of his father and the living, breathing consequence of Henderson's presence. The silence of the hallway was a physical relief, a buffer against the emotional storm we had just weathered. Alina leaned against me, her body trembling with a fine, exhausted vibration. I guided her down the grand staircase, each step an echo of our departure from the life we had known. We did not speak. There were no words yet for what had just happened. We emerged into the weak afternoon light. My car, a sensible sedan that looked utterly out of place in the sweeping driveway, felt like a sanctuary. I helped Alina into the passenger seat, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were relearning how to inhabit her own body. As I walked around to the driver's side, I saw Henderson's sleek, black town car parked just behind us, a silent promise of the legal machinery that was already beginning to turn. I started the engine, the familiar hum, a grounding force. I didn't pull away immediately, instead, letting the heater push back the chill that had settled deep in our bones. I looked at the house, a monument to Arthur's success and, now, to his family's near collapse. The battle was won. As I had told myself, the trust was secure, but the victory felt hollow, poisoned by the means of its achievement. Alina finally broke the silence, her voice a ragged whisper. "He called me a ghost. I let Miguel take the lead because it was easier than facing the emptiness. I let him become a stranger, and I let you carry the weight alone." A single tear traced a path through the fine powder on her cheek. "I am so sorry, Mama, for everything." Deportation was a blunt, brutal instrument. It was what a system like Henderson's would dictate. It was a punishment that would only breed more resentment, more distance. It would not heal the wound Miguel had inflicted. It would simply cauterize it with a brand of finality. No, justice needed to be more nuanced, more powerful. It needed to be a lesson, not an annihilation. I drove us to a small, quiet park overlooking the city. We sat on a cold bench, watching the lights begin to twinkle in the dusk. And I told her my plan. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rebalancing the scales. It was about forcing a recognition so profound it would be seared into their very understanding of family and respect. The next morning, I summoned Henderson to my modest apartment. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the patronizing executor of a will. He was a functionary awaiting my instructions. I sat at my small kitchen table, the newly perfected, legally pristine affidavit of support resting in the center like a holy text. "The document is ready," I stated, my voice calm and even, "but it will not be filed today. First, both Alina and Miguel were to provide me with a written, formal apology. It was not to be a vague expression of regret. It must specifically acknowledge their condescension. their failure to see my intelligence and my value beyond my utility, and their profound lack of respect for the sacrifices I had made for this family. I wanted the words to cost them. I wanted them to have to articulate their own arrogance and see it in black and white. Second, they would pay a significant, symbolic fine. Not to me, never to me. The money was to be donated, in their names, to a local immigrant support organization, one that helped people, like me, navigate the very system they had so carelessly threatened me with. The amount needed to be substantial enough to be felt, a financial pinch that would serve as a constant reminder of the cost of their betrayal. It was proof, I explained to Henderson, that they valued my sacrifice more than their own public image or their bank balance. Henderson listened, his face an impassive mask. He was a man who dealt in contracts and clauses, and he recognized the elegant brutality of my terms. The consequences for them were not imprisonment or exile, but something far more potent in their world: public humility and financial pain. For me, it was the complete and total validation of my intelligence and my strength. I was not begging for my place. I was dictating the terms of my permanence. They will see this as extortion, Henderson remarked, though there was no judgment in his tone, merely an observation. They can see it as they wish, I replied. I see it as tuition. They are paying for a lesson they desperately need to learn. The trust is safe. The family name is preserved. This is the price for that preservation. Tell them. He understood power, and he now understood where it resided. As he left, I picked up the perfect document. It was no longer just a piece of paper guaranteeing my right to stay. It was a weapon of my own design, and I had just demonstrated my mastery over it. The war for my son's soul was indeed just beginning, but on this new battlefield, I was no longer a pawn. I was the general, and I had just drawn the first line in the sand. The silence in my apartment was a new kind of sound. It wasn't the empty quiet of waiting or the tense hush of servitude. This was a rich, earned silence, thick with the scent of ink and the soft scratch of nib on paper. The visa, a crisp, official document, lay on the mantelpiece, a silent testament to the line I had drawn. It was no longer a plea for acceptance. It was a statement of fact. I was here. Elena's children, Sophia and Matteo, sat across from me at the small table, their usual boisterous energies subdued into a focused curiosity. Their small hands, accustomed to the frantic swiping of screens, were clumsy around the slender bamboo pens. I guided Sophia's fingers, adjusting her grip. Not a feist, mi vida. Primera Said, my voice calm. You are not grabbing something. You are inviting the ink to dance. The pen is a partner, not a prisoner. He was trying so hard, this boy who had once mimicked his father's dismissive tone when speaking to me. Now, he looked at me as if I held the secrets of the universe in this little bottle of black ink. In a way, I did. I felt, rather than saw, Elena and Miguel appear in the doorway. They did not speak, did not dare to interrupt the lesson. Their presence was a heavy, penitent weight at the edge of the room. I did not acknowledge them. My focus was on the children, on the simple, profound act of shaping a single stroke. The horizontal line, I explained, must be steady, like the horizon itself. It is the foundation. It must be true. Attention to detail is not a small thing, I continued, now speaking in the clear, elegant Spanish of my father's house. The language felt like putting on a well-tailored suit of armor after years in borrowed, ill-fitting clothes. It is everything. A single stroke out of place can change the meaning of a word, the intent of a message. It can be the difference between a contract and a betrayal. This, I said, holding it in my palm so they could see the intricate carvings, was my grandfather's, Don Ricardo. With this, he would mark his letters, his documents. It was his authentic hand. A promise that the words came from him, and that he stood behind them. It was a sign of honor, a scrawl on a line, but a signature can be rushed, it can be forged. A seal requires intention. You must press it into the wax. You must hold it firm. You cannot be careless. You must mean it. Elena's eyes were glistening, not with her usual performative tears, but with what looked like awe. Miguel would not hold my gaze for long. His shame was still a fresh wound, but there was no resentment in his posture, only a newfound wariness, the kind a junior officer shows a commanding general. Your abuela is not just teaching you how to write letters, I said, my voice softening but losing none of its authority. She is teaching you how to build a life where your word has weight. where your actions are deliberate, where you never, ever make the mistake of underestimating someone because they seem to be from an old world you do not understand. A mastery of knowing when to be silent and when to speak, and exactly what price to demand for your silence. And like any contract, its terms must be respected by all parties. The trust must be safe. The name must be preserved. But beauty is a consequence of integrity, not the goal. They had tried to use the system against me, and I had taken that very system and forged it into my seal of authority. I had shown them the power of an authentic hand. And from now on, every word spoken in this family would be written with the ink of that understanding.